guys, in the live stream section, let me know if you're following along. If not, just let me know and I'll go over through some things. Okay, so now I'm gonna get started on these modify tools. So modify is a set of tools that allow you to change the sketch object that you're using. So let's say you have a rectangle, right? And you want to make a round rectangle. Well, then you could just select these corners and specify how round you want your rectangle to be. So you can make it 15 millimeters, 20 millimeters, which of course will mess up your model. To a certain extent, you can't go really far with your fillets, or they're going to mess with, or fillets, however you want to say it, or else it's going to mess with the other shapes that are there. So you can do 5, you can do 10, not 510 because that will mess up royally. But essentially, you can just specify your radius that you want things to happen. Okay. Now you have this trim tool, right? So let's say you just made two shapes, but you only want to keep you only want this to be one shape instead of being two that you can manipulate independently. Well, then you can snip certain parts of the shape. For example, you can snip here, 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 and here. Now it's all one shape that you can change on a whim. Okay? And sometimes Fusion messes up with collisions and stuff, which will make some of the most funny errors ever. Like, there are some hilarious things that you can do in Fusion. Now, now that you know how this one works, you can also do something called an offset. Let's say you want to make a tube, right? And the inner diameter of this tube is 5 and the outer diameter is 6. So you can make a circle that, let's say 60, just so that we're in centimeters. It's 60 centimeters outer diameter and 50 centimeters inner diameter. But let's say you don't necessarily want to draw another 50 centimeter hole. Well, you can just offset your circle inward by negative 10 millimeters. Now you should have a 50 centimeter hole. Or no, not 10, because then you'll get you'll get 40 centimeters. So, or 40 millimeters, yeah. So you kind of have to think. You have to use math, right? I know it sucks, but you're gonna have to use math to figure out offsets because you want your offset. Your offset's gonna apply to the entire shape. So you're essentially doubling the amount of offset to affect a new shape. So like you saw before, my offset was only 10 millimeters, but the entire inner diameter changed by 20 millimeters. So because you have 10 millimeters on this side and 10 millimeters on this side that you're offsetting. Now let's say we wanted the inner diameter to be 50 like before, then we'd have to offset by 5 because 5 on this side plus 5 on this side is 10, and 10 minus 60 is 50. And now you'll have the right size pipe. Okay, from here we can actually look at scaling. Okay, so this is a sketch scale. So you want your entities, and then you can just select a point out in space by making a point using the point feature, and then that will extend your object to that point or scale your object to that point. All this stuff, there is. I'll go through that in a sec. But all this stuff is, all Fusion is really meant for experimentation. So the reason why I know this stuff is because I figured out which tools I like using the most and selected them on my toolbar. Well, maybe not blend curve. Blend curve doesn't need to be there, but everything else is like, okay, I use this more often than any of these other features. I should keep using it. So I should attach it to my toolbar. So most of these tools, I'll be completely honest with you, I don't know much about sketch scale. I don't know much about blend curve. I don't know much about extend, but I do know about chamfer and fillet because these are the tools I use. Okay? So now we're going to get into some of the constraints. I'll show you the constraints in a sec, but we actually had a question. So Anish is asking, is there no circle by radius in Fusion? The answer is there actually is circle by radius. So you can just create a center diameter is how it starts, right? And you even though it might not be here, you can easily just do a center by radius by just doubling the radius of the circle you want, because that's the same thing as center by diameter. But the answer is no, there is not. Which is, it is what it is. Because um, and I personally think center by diameter is just superior because you can, let's say you have a square, right? Let's say you have a square or a rectangle, and you're like, well, I want this rectangle to have a hole in it, but now you want to define the hole by like a radius instead of a diameter. Well, if you're defined by radius, then you can, of course, the merit of that is you can select the center of the rectangle and extend outward by that radius. But that is not necessarily relevant if you can just select the center of the rectangle by default in Fusion. So if you just select the center of the rectangle anyway, then changing the radius of the or making the radius of the circle more important than the diameter doesn't necessarily matter. So yeah. So now we're gonna go through the different ways to make shapes. So here's a 3-point rectangle, which, as you saw, it uses 3 points to create a rectangle. So that one is very self-explanatory. 2-point is what we looked at before, and then center rectangle essentially makes the diagonals for you, and you just need to select a slope from the center or from your point of origin for this rectangle to define the rectangle. Now these are construction lines, so as you'll see here, which are extremely useful in some parts of Fusion 360 that I'm not going to go into right now because they're a lot more advanced than we need to look at right now. So, so now that you understand how circles and rectangles work, we can look at arcs. So an arc basically is just a series of points that you can manipulate into a part of a circle. So if you'll see, you're going to have the center point. Well, that just shows where the center of the circle is that you have the arc originating from. Now this is useful that it shows you this because you can easily manipulate where the arc is, but you can also determine what kind of radius you're dealing with. By the way, excuse me, sorry about that. By the way, you can actually affect or change, not even change, just look at measurements in Fusion on the bottom right hand corner. So if I had a line like this, well, I could just be like, how long is this line? Select the line, bam, there it is. It's 105 millimeters. You also have a more in-depth version of this called the measure tool, which lets you select many points and determine their distance from each other. Okay, now we're going to go back a little bit and look at the same pipe that we made before. 60 millimeters and 50 millimeters. Let's say we want to extrude this pipe. So I'm going to finish the sketch, and now I want to make this pipe. So I'm going to make it, let's say, 20 millimeters tall. So what you saw me do right there was click the extrude tool right here, and then select the region that you want to extrude. So I want to extrude the region between these two circles. And then I can go 50, 20, and I can define how tall this region will be. Okay, so now I have a ring that's this big. Okay, one more important thing that you have to know is that with Fusion 360, you can do something extremely important called dimensioning. So you have just an arbitrary circle, right? But let's say you want this circle to be a certain dimension. Well, now you can change the size of the circle by that much. Now, let's say you didn't actually want the circle to be 20 millimeters. Well, you can double click on the dimension and be like, okay, now I want you to be 30 millimeters. Okay? So this tool is very important also because you can set aside how far apart things should be from each other. So let's say let's say I have this rectangle. I want to make sure this rectangle stays the same size every time. So I'm going to select this dimension and press enter. and it's going to save the size of that dimension. Now the size of the dimension won't change. So let's say I change this. Now you just have a rectangle that's floating in space that won't change size. So now I want to make sure this rectangle is like 25 millimeters away. Wow, so now we have a rectangle that's 25 millimeters away. We can't increase or decrease the size, but we can increase and decrease the vertical size. So dimensioning is really important to make sure you're referencing things against each other. So that was extremely important with our custom parts because we had to be like, okay, so now we're in our robot and we want to make this custom part that holds up our idler bearing. Well, how do I do that? Well, I'm just going to dimension a sketch from the certain plane that I want, and I'm going to dimension it so it's a little this distance away, this distance up, this distance down, correct? And that lets me orient everything in space. The point of fully constraining a sketch is that once you have a fully constrained sketch, you know that that sketch will not change. So there have been issues with my Fusion 360 and other Fusion 360s where as soon as you finish a sketch, you may accidentally like hold and drag something and it will mess with the positioning of the sketch, right? So more often than not, it's not necessary to fully constrain a sketch, but when you want things to have an exact position relative to each other, then you're going to want to fully constrain your sketch. Okay, so does that make sense? Okay, so I'm gonna move on now. So here we go. So now we have our two shapes. Like I said, you can extrude these shapes. Um, for the rectangle, what if you wanted to fix that point without referencing the origin? Is there a fixed constraint? Yeah, actually, so you can select this constraint and press fix or unfix. So now this shape will fix itself on this plane. So here, let me show you. It should not move now. Yeah, you see, I can't even select it to move. Now it's fixed to its position on the right and left side. And now if I want to fix this point too, now I can't even move the rectangle whatsoever. So if you want to keep things in the position they are, you don't also necessarily have to constrain. You can just fix two sides and bam, you're good, right? Of course, you can also reference things to each other. So let's say I wanted to make a line and I wanted to reference this rectangle to this line, but I want the line to be tangent to my circle. So I'm going to select the tangent tool in the constraint section and select it tangent to the circle. So now this line is just perfectly tangent to the circle. Now I can easily dimension this line to this other line and delete this so I can do that. And just change from here. So now it's this rectangle is 20 millimeters from the edge of the circle. So that's going to be very helpful learning how these constraints work. So horizontal vertical just says that a line is perfectly horizontal and another line is perfectly vertical. You can see that right here and right here. These are both horizontal and vertical constraints. Now this tangent constraint, like I said, puts a line tangent to a circle. Now let's say I wanted to make two lines the same length, right? This line is not the same length as this line. Well then I can make this line equal to this line, and now the lengths are the exact same. Okay? Now let's say I wanted to make these lines parallel. Well, I can do this and do this, but this says it's over constrained because they're already parallel. They're both vertical lines. Well, now I want to make this weird curve, this weird edge parallel. Well, then I'm going to select these two and send them to the parallel. So, as you can see, these constraints are very useful in making things work. And also, one last thing before leaving this sketch menu is that we have an extremely important series of events when you want to make something. So let's say I want to make a cube, right? Well, what shape do you need for a cube? You just need a rectangle or a square. or you need a square for a cube more specifically. But the important premise here is that you want to draw your shapes before constraining them. You want to draw your shapes before defining them, so you know what shapes you're working with. So, for example, well, now I want to make this into a square. Let's say it's 20 by 20, right? Well, that's way far away from the origin. Well, let me fix that. I'm gonna go put my thing here like this, and I'll make this constraint negative 10. Or not negative, I'll just make it 10. Or not even that. Let me just make it 0. Or not even that. If we make it 10 and then we constrain this one here by 10, then like there you go. And then let's say you want to make 4 squares. Well, then you can make 2 lines here. This one and this one. And now you can easily just go in and mirror these. Okay, wait, let me select this last line. Now you can easily mirror this across these 2 lines. So first you mirror it here, and then you can select all these features and then mirror it here, and now you have 4 squares. Okay, so that's sketches. That's literally sketches.